Mind Bend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for Mind Bend Creative.
Thanks for joining me this morning, Acacia.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So the Awakening of Consciousness conference was yesterday, and it was the first conference by the Psychedelic Institute. And how did you wind up down here to present?
I traveled here with a friend who was also speaking, and we both showed up in the middle of the day, and we had a great experience. Both of us had like 3 or 4 panels, workshops, lectures. It was good.
Yeah, you were busy yesterday. You were kind of all over the place on 4 panels.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not new to you. You're
No.
a regular touring, lecturing.
Yep. I'm generally lecturing about mushrooms.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it was good. Is there anything in particular that stood out to you?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's about 1 million questions, and I want to start with some softballs, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
So when we're talking about the psychedelic experience, in a nutshell, what are we talking about? I mean, I know it's hard to apply like one particular thought to anything here, but if someone says, I'm interested in psychedelics, what do you think they're actually interested in?
Altered states of consciousness.
Yeah, non-ordinary states of consciousness.
Non-ordinary states of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that psychedelics are one of the oldest ways that the humans have enjoyed. I say the humans because all animals, at least if they're in an area where there are psychoactive plants, like you'll see jaguars gnawing on ayahuasca vine in the jungle, like getting high and rolling around, like feeling good. Humans and animals in general like to get high, and that's an altered state of consciousness.
What is it? Why do we like to get high? What's going on there?
It feels good, it feels good. And I think that our ancestors, speaking of maybe the stoned ape theory, I like that theory a little bit,
Yeah.
But if you go back far enough, even 100,000 years, it made us creative. It made our minds expand. They're saying, in certain research on psilocybin mushrooms, that could potentially cause the corpus callosum in the human brain to become more enhanced. Einstein's corpus callosum was like the size of his whole brain. So they took out his brain, looked at it, and they were like, holy shit, what is that?
Corpus callosum is not a term that I hear come up very often.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, that's the left and the right hemisphere of the brain, the different multitude of connections. It's this really dense fibrous unit that's underneath that really pretty gelatinous level of the right and the left hemisphere of the brain, right underneath the medulla oblongata. So,
Did you have to study the brain as part of your background in astrophysics?
No, I actually ended up meeting a lot of psychonauts who didn't know what their brains were. So I ended up studying neurology and neuroscience just out of curiosity myself. It's like, well, if we've got a bunch of psychonauts dropping acid, doing mescaline and ayahuasca every day, there was a whole time where there were people who were using psychedelics like popcorn, kind of in, I'd say in 2008, 2009, there was a group of people who called themselves tricksters or clowns, and that was their thing, doing crazy amounts of acid, crazy amounts of mushrooms. And one of them was my friend. I wasn't doing that kind of stuff. I didn't have the balls, but one of my friends, he was really just pushing the limits, and he'd come back exhausted, have all sorts of anxiety symptoms. I really got to see him abuse his body and brain, and I didn't like it. So I wanted to teach him how to be a little bit more responsible. And even to this day, he's known for how much LSD he does, but he is a much healthier individual, I think, because he started, actually using some vitamin supplements. He started taking breaks in between doing certain psychedelic drugs, and also reintegrating with medicines that are designed to also improve short-term memory, and also exercise the human brain. So, I watched him kind of go from being a very scattered, very depressed psychonaut to now he's still a little bit scattered, but he works a regular job, and he kind of just seems like that guy who has a really weird and interesting story, but he's a lot more grounded than he used to be. So
yeah, there was the cautionary tale in my high school years of the friend that did too much acid and wound up.
He was seeing dragons by the fridge. I think we all grew up with that.
Well, what's the compulsion to push the envelope there? What is it? We talked about non-ordinary states of consciousness and how we enjoy being high. I want to stay on that for a minute because enjoying the experience of, high can mean a number of things,
Oh,
right?
yeah. It has very many different shades.
Yeah.
And I really want to talk more about those who push the envelope respectfully. The human desire to push the envelope is to explore. And that's a natural desire that I think everybody has on some level. Exploration. We all know that someone, at least in our lives, maybe didn't tell us they were doing it, but somebody wanted to see some shit, and maybe explore something that they'd never experienced before.
Well, everybody does that naturally when they dream nightly to an extent.
Yes,
would you consider that to be an exploration?
Well, I think it's not conscious exploration. And I think some people feel that, unless you're lucid dreaming. Now, that's a whole nother department. Some people would argue that the dream is the ultimate exploration area. Me personally, I've experimented with a ton of oneiriogens, which are dream herbs. Like there's entheogens, there's oneiriogens. Oneiriogens, it has its own class.
Holy mackerel.
From flying cream, like the witch's ointment, the witches rubbing Amanita muscaria down below, riding a broom through the air, people are looking in the window like, what the fuck is Sally doing, man? She must be a witch. She's got that wart. My God, so it's these oneiriogens that open up that realm of exploration. I remember one night after now a lot of people don't do this at home, kids. Like, do not do this. But I did eat one seed of datura, gemstone weed seed. And it was like I ate like half a seed because I had fibroid tumors. I was abusing Tylenol. Like I was eating like 40 pills, like a couple days, like enough to pretty much kill a horse. And it was just because I was in excruciating pain. If you don't know what fibroid tumors are or endometriosis is, it basically feels like someone's taking a knife and then like trying to like stir the soup inside of your guts.
Great.
It's terrible. But anyway, this datura knocks out the pain. But at the same time, it knocks you out in like 5 minutes flat and you sleep for like 8 hours. But the sleep is like taking bong rips of DMT the whole time. It's just so fucking vivid. I was in the front seat of a pod racer eating an interdimensional hot dog, going like at the speed of light. It was amazing. Just the dreams I had. I remember I woke up in another dimension and I was looking at my hands and I could see through my hands and it was like purple biomorph jelly. I was looking at the screen. I was in the interdimensional TSA, the airport, in the other dimension, walking around, looking at fish in the fish tanks. Like, man, you look kind of weird. The fish comes out, looks at me, and it's like, you look kind of freaky too. I'm like, oh, freak.
You've been gifted with recollection, which is enjoyable for the rest of us.
That was not a gift, actually. That was something I had to earn.
Okay, all right.
There was a time where I couldn't remember any of my trips, actually. And that's why I got into neurology and neuroscience. Oh, wow. Because I didn't realize how much I was abusing my serotogenic system.
Okay.
And that was because I wasn't sleeping and I was doing a lot of shrooms.
Okay. You weren't sleeping because you were up researching all night?
No, I worked 3 jobs.
Okay.
And the time that I did have off from work, I was probably doing psychedelics.
Yeah.
I was probably trying to like get into the inner reaches of my mind. I remember I had this one trip where it was like the whole universe unlocked, right?
Okay.
And then everything closed back up and it said, you're not ready yet. And so I questioned, I'm like, not ready for what yet? What do you mean? It's like, not ready to take this seriously. And this was like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. This is when me and my wife first met. I didn't really understand like where I came from. There was no such thing as healing trauma with mushrooms yet. It was just you were doing psychedelics and having a good time. And if it helped you not kill yourself, that was a happy accident. Now, that so many people have had success with happy accidents that really aren't accidents. There's some science to the way it helps you navigate around that suicidal depression.
Through new neural pathways. And for me, the memory loss was a sign that I needed to take my practice more seriously. And I say practice, like I needed to actually form some sort of cognitive awareness that this was something probably sacred and important that I needed to mentally and physically prepare for. Before that point, I was like, oh yeah, if I'm dehydrated, whatever, I'll just drink some water during the trip. I'd wake up and I'd have back pain. I'd have a headache. I'd just be like, I'm hungover from
doing drugs, whatever. I didn't take it that seriously. And it wasn't until I started like actually studying my body's physiology, I was like, I'm killing myself. I'm smoking a pack a day. I have this crazy unhealthy diet. I need to change my life. I need to get my diet straight. I need to, learn how to breathe. Like I need to, stop smoking cigarettes. Those weren't thoughts that I had in my mind until that trip. And it's when you get locked out of heaven and you're like, the mushroom's like, okay, you know what? I've shown you enough pretty shit. Now I'm going to show you all of your existential fears. And you need to actually address them because you're allowing fear to control your life. And every time you get anxious, you're literally burning your lungs to try and calm your anxiety down. And it's not working. Every time you don't have a cigarette, you're freaking yelling. You're a rage nut. You're a mess. I was just sitting here crying like, oh my God, mushroom, why? And I was so grateful. Because that's when I actually started taking control of my life.
Yeah. So purpose became a new inflection in the process.
Oh, no. It became, okay, my mom's getting older. Maybe I should call her every day instead of calling her all sorts of terrible names because she's homophobic. That's not her fault. She grew up a certain way. Let me actually be compassionate towards my parents. Like, try to at least understand where they're coming from. They wiped my butt. Like I had like this vision of like poop everywhere. My mom told me I was that kid who pooped behind the couch. Like, I crawl behind the couch and leave a giant turd.
Yeah.
I was like, man, you went through that. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I understand. You know what? Okay. I am the brat right now.
Okay. So did the stance soften? Did the stance through the work? Did that enable you to have a different perspective and looking back on your relationship with your mom specifically?
It took several years. There were some years where, I just didn't have any restraint. She'd say one thing about the person I was with, or my dad would say one thing. I'd be like, okay, boom, cut off for 3-4 years. I can't do this anymore. And then that's when the mushroom was like, you're talking about like being love and light. What do you mean love and light? You're ridiculous. You don't even give your mom 5 minutes to give you a reason as to her logic about you being safe. Like you were sexually assaulted, potentially raped, while you're in college. She's probably wondering what whack job you're with right now. And that's perfectly okay. She's your parent. That's her job. Stop being such a little crap about it. And I was like, you know what? It gave me a whole new perspective. Like, I can be compassionate the way I want compassion. So let me stop expecting compassion. Stop being entitled. Let me actually give compassion first. And if I get hurt, then maybe that's a lesson for me. Maybe that's something that is a reflection of how I used to behave. Let me start processing on a different level. Let me rethink how I talk to others and also how I want to be talked to. That was a huge step forward for me, like in my life overall. Like when I did that, my job started getting better. I got a promotion. I was working at a call center on the border of Mexico at the time when I was like really going through the heavy lessons. This was like 2016, 2015. Like I have been doing psychedelics for years up until that point. And that's when I start getting deeper into Kilindi Iyi's work. And he was giving lectures about Africa and the Sahara and our ancestors being up in trees, coming down, seeing a giant, fat, tasty mushroom. I was like, this guy, I'd never seen someone who I could relate to, I guess, who looked like me.
Yeah, how did you discover Kilindi Iyi?
Oh my God. Well, it first started with me becoming friends with him with my fake account on Facebook. And I really wasn't into his work that much. I was more into what I had heard about the buzz about women and entheogens. I was like, I had never met another female who was like African American who was doing psychedelics, but like doing it with a practice. Like that was the point where I had decided that I was going to start changing my life. And I didn't want to be around a bunch of people who are going to be a bad influence on me. Like
bad influence in your psychedelic practice?
Yeah, in my psychedelic practice. I didn't want a bunch of people telling me, girl, you're too freaking heavy. Like what you're talking about, like diet. Like, there was a lot of people in the space who were just going to raves and just freaking partying for hours and then coming home hungover and very toxic. Yeah. I didn't want to be around that kind of energy,
Yeah.
It was just, it wasn't that I had no judgment towards them or anything. It was just going to set me back, and I knew it. And that's why I didn't let myself like even interact with the psychedelic community until after I turned like 18, you know, because I was aware and I had been doing psychedelics as a teenager, and it did prevent me from trying to take my own life, which I appreciate, but I felt that I was very vulnerable. Like even the guy who was giving me mushrooms was like, I'm only going to give you mushrooms if you don't take any other drugs.
May I ask how psychedelics prevented you from taking your own life?
Well, I got depressed because one of the people that I was with had kicked me basically out of my own house. I was working several jobs, and this was as a teenager. You know, I had left home. I was in college as a dual credit student, like at age 13. And I had already been like working as a work study student. Like I was a teenager in college. Mm-hmm. So the pressure that I felt was being weighed on me as a homeschool kid, you know, it's like coming from a very, you know, kind of, I wouldn't say that me and my parents were rich. I wouldn't say they were super poor either, but we did go through some struggles, you know, and I know that they did their best. But the goal was when I was a kid, you got to go grow up to be our revenge on everything that we couldn't get. And you got to buy your mom a house, you know, like, you know, I wanted to do those things inherently, but it was all grades, flashcards, every day of my childhood, like past age 7, I was writing by hand algebraic formulas and calculus formulas and then posting them on the wall. That was my job. Like my job was to learn. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that so much now. But at the time, I was very traumatized. Mm-hmm. I was in an extreme state where I was like, I fucked up. My parents hate me. I'm gay. I'm retarded. I'm apparently insane. Like, these are the things that were going through my head. Like, I was very, like it still makes me a little bit emotional because
Sure.
I know how close I got.
Yeah.
I know how close I got. Yeah. And I wasn't telling anybody at that time. And that's dangerous.
This is what age? 12?
Oh, God. Like, I didn't get to that point until I was, like, 16.
Okay.
That was after I'd been in a bad relationship, like my first really awful abusive relationship.
Oh, wow.
And my parents kind of knew about it. They tried to call the police on my girlfriend at the time because they were like, you're underage. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm in college. I've got a student ID. You know, like, I don't care. Like,
yeah, you're all grown
everybody
up.
I know is having sex, you know, doing whatever, doing drugs. You don't know what it's like. I'm at a crazy university. I was at a party school.
Okay,
I went to
okay.
Southern Methodist University. And even though
Nobody
I wasn't
parties
going,
like the Methodists, right? They have a particular
they
method.
scared me. Like, I went to one rave. That's the first and the last rave I ever went to. I walked into the rave and I was like, yeah, man, I was trying to do the dance and everything. And then all of a sudden some idiot pours beer all over my head. And I'm like, oh my God, my mom's going to smell my beer. I just went like pale, like homeschool kid dies. And like, I left the rave and never went to another rave. But I still had friends who were like pumped up on Adderall and Ritalin, and you know, that was like the smart young kid department. Like, okay, you're smart, you're 14. All right, come here, kid. I'm gonna give you Adderall. I'm like, no, that dude over there almost had a heart attack. Fuck that. He's like, well, I've got these cookies. At least it's a plant. Here, Square, eat this. I'm like, oh, fuck that. Tastes nasty. What the hell is in this? He's like, I don't know. You know, like that's. You know, I could not believe the level of trust I had back then. I was very naive, you know?
Yeah.
And I still know that I had one trip. My friends were like, dude, there's a new hookah joint. Let's go smoke hookah. Man, that was the worst encounter, I think. The worst decision I ever made was going out with my friends to an Arabic restaurant and smoking hookah because I immediately got hooked on nicotine.
Okay.
I got so addicted. Like,
yeah.
Nicotine made me so ridiculously high.
Yeah.
Like, it was like crack to a teenager. Like, to my developing brain, from that moment forward, for the last 15 years, I'd say, like, maybe 12 years, like, ever since I was, like, 14, 15 years old, I was trying to find a vape or trying to find a cigarette. And I've just, like, kicked that habit, like, in the last year. Like, I stopped for, like, a year and a half, and I'd start again.
Mm-hmm. Powerful.
This is the first year that I'm like, I don't need that. Mm-hmm. I've got tea ceremony. Mm-hmm. I can make myself some matcha. Mm. You know, I don't need stimulants.
Do you feel
to cope
better?
with reality. Of course. Like, it wasn't until I got sick with COVID the first time, like, in 2020, that I took my lung health that seriously.
Jeez.
It was only when I couldn't get up off the bed
Yeah.
and I was crying in bed because I couldn't tell my mom that I was dying. And I was like, if I die right now and the only person with my body is my wife, my parents are not going to be cordial towards my partner. Like it was really more out compassionate at that time for my partner, and my partner actually died last year. And having to talk to her parents and say, okay, she had late stage heart disease, and being like in medicine work, like I do know herbs that would have helped her with heart disease, but also doing the reverse math, like, okay, when we met, you were 400 pounds, 37 years old, you were about to kill yourself. Like we got together at a time that we were both very mentally unstable, and that's why we started taking psychedelics together.
Okay, so
I watched her go from a dysphoric, pretty much atheist, like someone who was very much into like Wicca, kind of played around with spirituality, to being a devout Zen Buddhist. Like I watched that transformation of someone who could not look in the mirror because, well, I say she at this time, but she preferred male pronouns. She preferred to be called he and him. But over time, the pronouns didn't even matter anymore because they learned how to love themselves on a radical level. It was like seeing a caterpillar turn into a butterfly. I can't say that Mike and Melody were the same person because as Mike evolved, Mike started realizing how much stress she put on appearance and her place in society. And when she started to deconstruct that, she became something beyond genderqueer or transgender, something that she would like to call an enigma. She would start saying things like, I don't exist. I'm everything. I'm nothing. And she started relating to the Zen Buddhism in such a way that her gender identity took a back seat and her spiritual identity took a front seat. And so she didn't identify any specific way. She was like, whatever you feel need to call me, call me.
But there was happiness there.
There was joy. So much joy. And like to see somebody like crying in the bathroom because she's looking in the mirror and can't relate to her body, like literally feels like she's in the wrong body. Like to see her over time through utilizing the mushroom start feeling like I was the girlfriend who was outside the men's bathroom with a kombucha bottle ready to like knock somebody in the head in South Dallas, like for saying something that my partner was in the bathroom, in the wrong bathroom or whatever. You know, like I became vehemently an activist for trans rights, like as a result of that relationship. So to see someone who was suffering from suicidal dysphoria and the way that they were able to look at themselves and feel their body and touch breasts that first needed to be called pecs, you know, she still wasn't a fan of like presenting femininely. But when she realized that she didn't have to present femininely or masculinely to be accepted, that she had to accept herself, that's when I noticed a huge change in quality of life. And I feel like, you know, what she passed away from was something that I think that everyone who has a partner who has symptoms like swollen legs, they need to go to the doctor immediately now. Because it was that was the only thing that was a symptom. She was having pain in one leg, but she thought it was because she broke her other leg as a kid and she was overcompensating. We were living in the Sierra Madre region of Oaxaca. That's where I still live. Okay. Most of the year. And she had to walk up a mountain that's literally like 3,000 feet up. So all of us were like struggling, you know, but that's something that was like a silent killer. We came home, like we were in a polyamorous relationship at the time. And me and one of my other partners, we came home and the door was locked. But we didn't know she had already passed out. She was already gone by the time we got the house unlocked. And it was the most terrifying experience of my existence. And I'm still integrating through that, you know? But she would be so happy to see like the Psychedelic Institute, and she loved mushrooms. Like that, she was more of a psychonaut than me. She took higher doses.
You introduced her to mushrooms?
Yeah. You know, we were best friends for like 4 years before we met. And she had helped me through my suicidal depression. Like when I was on the other end of the phone with a knife to my throat, she was that voice was saying, Keisha, don't do it. Don't do it. And so for me, it was like, I got to give her what she gave me.
Yeah.
And that was the greatest privilege.
Yeah.
Was a kind voice to help on the journey. And sometimes a very damaged voice. You know, when we first got together, I was still healing through getting discharged from the United States military.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Twists and turns.
Yeah, you know, when I was at SMU, you know, at a certain point, because I was a transfer student from a community college, I ran out of money. I was a senior in college with no more scholarships, no more stipends. They're like, okay, sink or swim.
And you were 17 at the time?
Shoot, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I was like, okay, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And a recruiter was like, you know what? Take this ASVAB. We're gonna see like what your potential like MOS could be. I'm like, what? What does that mean? Learns the test. I took the test. I got 98, which was the highest like in the state at that time. Mm-hmm. And they're like, you got your choice of jobs. Like, we don't care. Like, whatever you've been doing, like, just don't write on the freaking form. Like, dude, you're a fucking genius. Like, we're signing you up right now. We'll pay for your college. We'll pay for your car. I was like, really? Really? I was like, I can eat a meal? Like, I was sleeping in the library. It got rough.
Wow.
It got really rough, man. I wasn't sure if I was going to survive because I was actually volunteering at a rape crisis center, trying to fulfill a class in gender violence, which I still got a W in, even though I did a whole, like, semester of rape crisis volunteering. But at the time, you know, I was like stealing candy bars from their fridge and stuff to eat to survive because I couldn't feed myself.
What's your favorite candy bar?
Payday. Payday
Totally
bar.
nuts.
Yeah, totally nuts. That's what actually brought me down for my first bad trip.
The grounding power of peanuts.
It has tryptophan in it.
Okay.
You know?
Very good.
You know, something I realized was apparently, like, one of the students of Baba Kilindi had said something about his peanut soup. And I was just thinking to myself, who peanuts in a soup? Like, what the fuck? And then I realized, like, how much tryptophan is in peanuts. I'm like, that's actually a OG move right there. If you're not getting enough sleep and tryptophan, like, converts itself into serotonin, like, tryptamines, like, what is that, you know? And I started getting into, like, you know, the actual metabolism chain of how serotonin eventually becomes melatonin. And
Well, this is something I want to, you know, yesterday when I was listening to one of the panels that you were talking on, maybe it was the microdosing panel, I can't remember what it was, but you've got the science. You can bring the science to the conversation. So, I mean, you know, it's hard to be an expert and it's hard to be an expert on multiple things, but, you know, it's great when you see a panel and multiple voices can put together on an idea, and then when you're in the audience, you have the luxury of being able to synthesize everything that's being put out there for you. So having the science, that was one of the things that caught me yesterday with you in particular, was having that interjection of the science to help shape the more metaphysical narrative too, because that's not everything that's not always something we have access to, the scientific understanding.
Like, for me, I love science so much. Like, you know, when I was a little kid, like, I wanted to be a meteorologist when I grew up.
Nice.
Like, that was my nerd thing. Of course, I went into astrophysics, partially because my English professor had a husband who was an astrophysicist, and she was like, all you do is wear blue jeans. Like, you're good at English, but you'd be a terrible writer. You need to go work in a science lab somewhere. I'm like, okay, all right, let's do it. You know, so, like, for me, I took these classes in elementary symbolic logic, intro philosophy, and I also took classes in skepticism.
Okay.
So, you know, I was kind of trained out of the metaphysical construct. Like, I didn't believe in any of the fairies and butterfly shit that the conscious community was talking about coming into it. Like, I had to be made a so-called believer.
Are you talking about other dimensions?
Yeah, I didn't believe that was a thing.
Yeah.
They were telling me, like, oh, okay, these shaman who think that when they shake a rattle in your face, it's just suggestibility. They're like, you know, in skepticism class, they were like just literally just hammering like energy. Like, you can, that's just the, you know, they're talking about like the skin and like how temperature can make one feel like there's an illusion of pressure. Like, they were trying to debunk everything that this community stands for. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. I like that. I was teacher's pet. I was sitting in the T area of the classroom. You know, like how they say, like, if you want to get good grades, you need to sit like in the front row or in the middle. You know, that was me. And skepticism. But at the same time, there was this part of my mind that was not able to grok all of the weird spiritual experiences I've been having my whole life, like since I was a little kid.
What did you attribute them to?
I was just like, you know, my mom was a Pentecostal, and for me, you know, going to church and seeing somebody like catch the spirit, it was just ridiculous. I'd just be like, the fuck, I don't want that, whatever that is.
You watched it going on.
You know, I watched it going on, like people going like spontaneous, what we call Kundalini awakening or some shit, like going, you know, like freaking out, like you've seen Elvis, like, you know, that was the church.
Gyrations and gesticulations.
Oh yeah, and then like talk about the Holy Spirit, like waving the hands. I'm like, I don't want you to touch me. No, like they had to baptize me. Like I think they took me like 4 different churches before I actually agreed to be baptized, because I was like, well, if you say that you want to feel the spirit, then I want to go to the most ridiculous church that I can like feel something at. Yeah. And I remember this is the day I decided to actually get baptized. Had my hand on the pew, I was kind of rocking back and forth. Like I still do that. Like it's a comforting mechanism that I've had my whole life. I think that's just it's partially I've been diagnosed with a little bit of autism, so it's something that I'm just kind of cool with. But when I was a kid, I would just be rocking back and forth, kind of like Ray Charles. In general. Yep, and it was that swaying, and I felt like this energy coming up through my feet, and it was hitting my heart, just like pumping like energy. I was like,
in
what
that church?
Is this?
In that church?
And you know, the pastor was talking about just something really uplifting, and I started to cry. And I didn't understand. I was like, why do I feel like this? Like. I think this is the place. And I look at my dad like, I think I feel something. You know, I think it's not it's not fake. He's like, all right, get her in the pool now.
Seize the moment. Seize the moment.
I think they knew that there's something a little off of me. They're like, she's gonna need some spiritual help. Like,
when I walked out of my first confession, I was raised Catholic. When I walked out of the first confession and said that I had like stole a brother's toy or made fun of my sister or something, I really felt like I was being flooded with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
I totally believe that I was just absolutely radiating with the spiritual energy. I remember that moment. I think it was
That's
second
beautiful.
grade, you know. But power of the mind, power of belief, power of hope, power of intention. You know, when you have the opportunity to be in front of a crowd for a lecture, you know you're speaking to so many different people with so many different perspectives and backgrounds and ideas and worries, you know. You got a big heart. What is your charge in that moment? Like how do you see that space being worth to you and to others?
I don't want it to be about me. In that moment, I let go. Person who's right here, let's go and let's God. Like, I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't prepare for my lectures.
Yes.
I just have experience.
Yeah.
And so
it's
if
genuine.
I see someone,
that's what it comes across to me. It comes across to me.
The thing I loved about Kilindi was when I listened to his lectures, there was nothing that I couldn't take to the bank. I would research everything that he said. It'd be like, Blonde Bob's Cave? Okay, bullshit. You know, because I was a skeptic, you know? I tried to crucify his ideology because I thought that there's absolutely no way that what he's saying about, you know, spirituality, but bullshit, you know? Like, I didn't really take it seriously until I had the experience, until I took like 5 grams, 10 grams, 15 grams, and everything that he said I challenged.
That was part of the entry to be able to communicate with him.
Yeah, you know, and for me, like, when I'm on that stage, I want what people hear me saying, like, to be irrefutably correct. You know, I know there's going to be multiple perspectives to it, but I want them to at least be able to research a word that I said or go back through the lecture. And if I said someone said something, they can find it, you know, and also the experience, I also want it to be something where like maybe it's not just my own experience I'm talking about. Most of the time it's the collective of what my students have brought to me, my experiences and my teachers' experiences. So if I'm sharing something about like, okay, learning about reflections of self, I'm I'm not just saying this because this is a fun theory that I heard about. I'm saying this because there's an actual culture like the Heyoka tradition or the tradition in Africa with Ifa, where there are characters that are trickster characters that aren't there to hurt you, but maybe there to make you laugh at yourself enough so you realize, what you're actually doing. I'm talking about something that has a cultural heritage and an experience that I've actually lived. So then I'm not just kind of leaving it up to, this is my objective, subjective. This is my body of living. This is my research. So when I'm presenting, I'm pulling from that, and so if someone says, well, I can't relate, I could be like, you know what, that's perfectly fine, but that same person might come back a year later and say, oh my God, I had the most mind-blowing experience on like 3.5 grams. I didn't see it coming. And I met myself and I saw, this other lower part of myself and I was able to overcome it. And I'd be like, great, that's great to hear, and, I feel like it's the nuts and bolts stuff. Like I love that Kilindi talked about like 20 plus dried grams and whatnot, but ultimately it took me years before I had the gumption to go in there. Like people are seeing me now and thinking, okay, you're 27, like how long have you been doing psychedelics? Like really, like come on, and for me it's like this has been a very gradual, cautious, very skeptical, very unsure walk at times. And now you're seeing me, at a phase of my development where I'm confident enough to share about it, but at the same time I'm not telling anybody that's what you go do, because I understand that it's not for everybody. It's just not for everybody,
Expand on that. It's not for everybody.
Yeah, doing 20 grams is not for everybody. At God Sitters program, like one of the projects I'm working with Zayador, for me, a high dose when I was suicidal was the best thing I could have ever done because it killed that part of myself that wanted to kill myself.
Did you know, okay, I'm suicidal, I'm going to go through a high dose experience?
No. This actually, like my first experience with mushrooms, I didn't even know it was mushrooms. They had these little fucking, like the little plastic bags are like twist bags.
Yeah.
Like, dude, like it was a bunch of like mushrooms, like all ground up and like all gnarled, all spored out, black looking, and they're just like, here, eat this. I'm like, eat the whole thing. And they're like, you know what? Yeah.
They didn't tell you what it was?
No. And I was sitting there and my boyfriend was with me, so I trusted him. He's like, oh yeah, that's mushrooms. I'm like, what kind of mushrooms? He's like, just here's a Hershey's bar. They taste like shit. Eat it. And I remember where I was sitting. I had a spot that was outside the Houston Museum of Natural Arts and Sciences. And it was my birthday weekend. And I was excited. And I was just like, screw it. I started eating. I'm like, this tastes like cardboard. Kind of funky cardboard. He's like, just keep eating it. He's like, here, give me one of them. He's like, ate one of them. And I just ate it and ate a chocolate bar. I was like, this is really good. Then all of a sudden, like I was laying there and it felt like I was laying there for an eternity. And I start seeing my face come out of the sky. And it's like, I'm like, oh shit, what the hell? And it's like, you're doing fine. Just keep going. Like in the most like, not condescending, but just like the most like The Office, like the guy in The Office, he's like, just like, yeah, next, stamp paper.
Routine.
Yeah, it was so routine. I was just like, oh, okay. And that was like me telling myself not to freak out or something, I guess. I don't know. I still to this day am wondering, am I going to have that trip where my head comes out of the sky? Like, oh, there's that little shit. Keep going. You're doing just fine. And, for me, it was the colors that came from everywhere. It was like somebody had the contrast, when you turn the contrast down on pictures and it just turns like black and white. It was like my reality was kind of dull and dismal, and really, really, really skewed. Like I think back to the psychological state I was in before psychedelics, and I'm like, I wasn't living a life. I was living dead already. I wanted to kill myself because I was cut off from all joy and all happiness. Like it was like a cartoon. like Wendy Adams, like walking around like a black and white cartoon, and all of a sudden there's colors and butterflies, and she's like, ew, oh my God, like that was my introduction, to a high dose. And that, at that time, it was 7 grams, that I was eating. It was Pinelius. So I'm kind of feel duped a little bit because they didn't tell me that Pinelius was twice as strong as psilocybin. So I think that that's why I gravitated initially towards the higher dose experiences of psilocybin mushrooms, because you need like 14 grams of psilocybin mushrooms to like get a 7-gram Pinelius Hawaiian incense trip, and I didn't know that until like maybe like 6 years ago, and so for me, like doing Pinelius and chewing it, I didn't know how to react when I looked at the mound. Like I was looking at, there's like a looking pond at Herman Park. It's very pretty, and there's some like clear grassy areas. I was looking at the grassy areas, and I was seeing mandalas just shifting and then like clicking into place. My dad's a draftsman, so I'm very aware like what like a 3D like grid looks like, and it looked like a grid. I was like, oh shit! Like I was looking at different spots on the grid, and different mandalas were like clicking into place and undulating like different gears. I'm like, whoa! I never noticed this before. How come you guys never told me about this before? And then all of a sudden, like a building like appears like a giant temple, and I'm just like, oh shit. I'm looking around like at people at the park to see like homeschool moms like with the story, like yeah, I'm like, oh my God, there's psychedelic. Oh well, shit, they can't see it. Oh okay, well, sitting there, I was like, there's a whole goddamn temple in the park. I want to go in it, so I go up to the entrance, the temple, and it says I need a key. I'm like, wait, I'm tripping, all right? I'm tripping. I took that with a grain of salt, actually, until I met Kilindi Iyi, who was saying things like certain areas require entry. Like there are dimensions that are talked about of legend, like Shambhala, where you can't want to go there to go there. If you want to go there, you're not going to be let in, kind of thing. Yeah. There's certain spiritual work that you have to do before you can just waltz into heaven's back door and just be like, "What's up, motherfucker?" Like, "Hi, I'm Acacia," and they're like, "This is a retirement home for Shinto priests." You're just like, Oh, sorry. Well, I just wanted to like hang out here on my mushrooms. Like, can I like just hang? Shh. Like, okay, I'm being too loud. Okay. Like, I've been to places where I totally felt like I was disrupting the atmosphere, and now I understand that many cultures treated the psychedelic mushroom as a key to the underworld. So that's where the ancestors lived. Basically, I was going to the graveyard and like waking everybody up and making a whole big mess. That's why I thought about it as later on, once I actually understood the cultural context in which people would normally take psychedelics in Africa, and the Aztecs would take psychedelics. When you look at the journey of the deified heart, for example, it spells it out really clearly for you. It shows the character Quetzalcoatl holding mushrooms in his hand, pointing his finger up at the underworld, at fear itself. Like literally the symbol of fear is this ugly, like looking like sickening skull-like figure that's got like blood dripping off. It's like and like the childhood language, like that guy is full, like that guy is like scary, like bad news guy. So you don't want to go around him. But no, this guy's pointing up at the guy like, okay, bro, we got beef. And the skull's like,
why is it always a skull? The skull can't help it. It's inside the body.
Archetype of fear. Like,
why?
I think that everybody, when they think of like the scariest thing they can think of, it's death.
Yeah.
I think that no matter what kind of thing that could happen to you, it's gonna come in a form of a way that like kills you. Like nobody's afraid of being like tortured for life. They're just like, okay, I'm gonna live again. Okay, it's not that bad. Nobody ever says like my greatest fear is being in prison, which is actually scarier than dying in my opinion, or being tortured.
Torturous,
and, yeah, exactly.
Prolonged, extended suffering and agony.
I've had people have trips like that. That's their archetype of fear. So they literally are spiraling out, which feels like eternity, in this hell realm. And the Taoists talk about, this is why you prepare for psychedelics. Like the Taoists, like plant medicine and alchemy book. You can look it up. Jerry Allen Johnson wrote the book, 80th generation Taoist priest. He said that psychedelics, specifically the psilocybin mushroom, should be taken with caution and preparation, cleansing, purification in a sacred way, because if you don't, there's a chance that you could have an experience that damages you, like seriously causes you a problem where you actually spiral out into hell.
Damages your psyche upon returning from the
gives
experience.
you PTSD basically.
Yeah.
And that's the risk.
When
that's
everyone's
why I say,
trying to get past PTSD in their lives when we talk about using this medicine to become...
Exactly. But the goal of going to hell is to get through it. Like the actual journey of the deified heart shows you that you're going to kill death. Whatever death is for you or fear is for you, you're going to cut its head off and like be holding like a trophy with your mushrooms in your hand. But it shows you like the dose. This is what's interesting. It's like you eat 2 mushrooms, 2 by 2, like Maria Sabina ate the mushroom 2 by 2. She cleansed it over copal, which also infuses it with anti-anxiety type molecules are attached to the copal. It's antibacterial too, which is good if you're just picking it off a cliff.
What's copal?
Copal is an incense. It comes from the bursura tree. It's a Mexican frankincense is what it's often referred to as. But Mexican frankincense comes from a different species of tree, and it smells more rich, like buttery orange pine notes. It's just like a dessert for the senses. And get this, it has a ton of anti-anxiety benefits. So if you're burning it and you're just smelling it, I've had someone, who's a client, a coworker of mine at God Sitters. I was burning copal and she was kind of feeling uncomfortable on a microdose. She felt like she took too much. And literally within like minutes of her just sitting there, she was like, oh, wow, I feel good. I feel okay.
This is something that anybody can get?
Yeah, this is something that anybody can get really affordably, like $2 like for an ounce. Okay. And when you're in Mexico, the grandmothers are picking it. So, it's this white, chalky, like frankincense resiny looking substance. And Maria Sabina would put it in her copalero, which is a special vase that's designed to burn copal, And
wow.
so she would put it in there with some hot charcoal. And her charcoals are, of course, not the kind that you get in a little witchy shop. Hers are the kind that are just like burnt wood, but you can watch the Veladas online. The documentary of Maria Sabina is something that I actually recommend that people watch before they eat the mushroom so that they understand like the actual tradition that's involved that actually can help someone avoid going to some of those really negative, dark freaking places.
This is advice for somebody who would be looking to have any kind of experience ingesting a psychedelic mushroom.
And another thing is like the Aztecs, like I think we get all of this in the community, the psychedelic chocolates. I hate to like burst people's bubbles, but that's kind of like poor research, because if you actually read the tradition, like Tom Lane writes a really good book about this, Sacred Mushroom Rituals. The chocolate's never taken at the exact same time as the mushroom. They're not just, I'm sure there were some crazy people who were probably like dropping mushrooms in their tea, but that wasn't the practice. The actual practice of the journey of the deified heart, it clearly states that you're supposed to take the chocolate the day before. And then that puts your mind in that elated state, that psychological happy state because of the theobromine and the magnesium. And you need magnesium to like if you're magnesium deficient and you're taking psychedelics, then you could have some problems actually producing enough serotonin to actually go into your next experience, because your body needs magnesium to actually synthesize the right hormones, These
are so fundamental and so potentially incredibly meaningful for a person's individual experience, but I think it's not common enough, this kind of preparation or understanding. Do you think that the microdosing culture in the United States right now is a bit cavalier? Do you have a sense that there's a lot of that space that's being explored without proper consideration?
Yeah, and for me personally, like I saw a brand that has ashwagandha in it, like if you just go on Reddit, like a quick Google search, like ashwagandha and shrooms, everybody's saying, well, ashwagandha actually binds to the 5-HT1A, not H2A receptors in the brain, the same as psilocybin does. So what you're doing is competing for those receptors. And if the ashwagandha is trying to bind, the psilocybin is going to bind. One of the two is not going to do it correctly, and it can overwhelm you, And so don't take them together. First thing ashwagandha and chocolate and shroom. Like, holy crap, that's a bad combination. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to kill you, but it's not going to make your brain feel the best after the experience.
Well, we're talking about resolving issues through reconstructing neurology to an extent, right? I mean, that's the physiological phenomenon at play.
Yeah.
How many times can you fix your neurology? I mean,
Well, that's the thing. You don't want to tangle yourself up. And I think that that's when people think that their brain is somehow like Play-Doh, and they're just going to be like, oh, 20 grams. Hey, okay, I make a little guy with a little mask. Okay. 5 grams. Okay, I'm going to give him a little hat. No, that's not how your brain freaking works. Like, you need to be very careful about your brain. Like, you don't want to... Here, let me put it this way. I'm gonna say something that might make people a little uncomfortable, but I'm okay with that because it's, in my experience, it's just my experience. It's my own 2 cents. So I'll preface it with that. Okay, like let's say that you are a pathological liar, and you take the mushroom, and because you have guilt of being a pathological liar, you constantly think of all the lies that you've told. So you're going through false narratives in your brain. This is where your real experience and your false narrative start to overlap. And since you're building, like you're skiing on a slope that's already fake, you could potentially cross some wires there. It's really a bad idea to confuse yourself on psychedelics. You're trying to figure out what's real in the experience. And the mushroom's telling you that something that you said is real is false. That could really mess with your psychological stability long term. Because now you're building grooves in your brain that you never intended to really build because you told a lie that wasn't true.
where is this being talked about, Acacia? Is it talked about in God Sitters? Is that a resource for people to come at this practice with this kind of meticulous intelligence integrated into the process?
Well, that's what I'm striving for. You know, I really want to see a new standard of just citizen scientists. You know, I'm not saying that we have to say that we're right. I'm just saying that it's okay for us to journal. It's okay for us to take notes and be scientific inside of our experiences, you know? And I want to encourage that. I want to make it mandatory and be like, this is the way you got to do it, because rules are meant to be broken, I think, in a manner of speaking, especially in the scientific community. They're, you know, every year they're changing something, you know. I mean, first it was SSRIs cure depression, and now it's like, that was a theory and we were wrong. 40 years after we told everybody that this is the way to do it, you know. So
Thank you for highlighting that.
you know, we've got to be very careful, even with our overzealousness and saying that we know what the brain is. I think that that's why we need more citizen scientists, so that we can form a bigger group of empirical data sets. And with more empirical data, that means that we can look at commonalities. We can sort through people's experiences and actually say, yeah, this is something that happens 42% of the time, 30% of the time. At least give ourselves an idea of something that could happen. Because right now, the risk when you look up psilocybin, it's like heart palpitations,
Right.
kidney failure, you know, and these aren't things that actually, like, if you look at the percentages, it's like 1%, like at the time someone actually had some problem with their kidneys. But if you look at like the Taoist plant medicine book again, I like the Taoist because it's one of the oldest lineages that's traceable. That's not like BS. You know, we can say, okay, they agree that this is their written fact. All right, I'm going to use their reference guide. And it says clearly that the mushroom is, it works on the kidney meridian. It's yang. So it's kind of an energy, in traditional Chinese medicine at least, that you don't want to be hitting your kidneys with a lot, because you could imbalance your kidney system, meaning that you could potentially develop issues later on if you don't actually take care of your kidneys. Not that it will harm your kidneys, but that it's like taking something like alcohol or energy drinks. It's going to stress your liver and your kidneys potentially at a point in time. We don't know when. So like, let's say you already have like kidney sepsis, or you already have some kidney disorder. You should be very careful about taking mushrooms. And this is why. Because if you're dehydrated and you're taking mushrooms and your kidneys are already stressed, your kidneys need to eliminate the psilocybin out of your body. It sounds gross, but if you actually were to test someone's urine, the morning after taking mushrooms, you'd find a lot of the psilocybin that didn't actually metabolize in the body inside the urine. Shamans in Siberia are pretty famous for drinking urine of, deer, making deer snow cones, drinking urine of shamans who have eaten Amanita muscaria, which is another psychedelic mushroom that's actually toxic. But after the shaman drinks, not shaman drinks, but after the shaman eats the Amanita muscaria, he eliminates some of the toxic constituents, so it's technically a lot safer for someone to drink his or her urine than it is to actually eat the mushroom itself. And that's something that I'm realizing here, is that we are still eating something that our body treats like a toxin. So we need to be very careful about the way that we do that. That's why I had lower back pain. I actually looked it up. I was actually going through like a crisis in my physical body. That extreme lower back pain is a sign that your kidneys might actually be shutting down, or worse, the migraine, the dizziness, the confused thoughts, after a high level experience and not taking care of yourself is something that you should stop right there. Don't just treat it like you're hungover. Treat it as if you need some electrolytes. Go get some freaking electrolytes. Like there's this term called the rave mom that I love. Like, how do we speak to the next generation, who's already doing this? I'm like, oh my God, why do I feel so crappy? You said they're healthy for me. Oh my God. How do you be a good rave mom, like to kids in spaces who don't really want to hear adult advice, but also for them to practice safety? I mean, kids, if you're going to take mushrooms, take some magnesium tablets and some electrolytes with you to the freaking party. It might save you problems later in life.
I think we have like 2 minutes left, but in closing, I want to revisit a quote that I floated past you before our conversation began from Kilindi.
Yes.
About the supernatural and the natural. Would you just lead us out of this conversation on a note with regard to that quote? Well,
he said in Africa, the supernatural and there's no separation between what's supernatural and what's natural. It's all natural. So if they see a guy who's got a falcon head and a human body, that's real to them because they experienced it, and they might utilize that technology to see when the rain is going to come. When you are in sub-Saharan Africa eating mushrooms in the bush, the animals that are around you are teachers of how to learn their skills, like how to become better at, if you would, shape-shifting into these different animal forms inside of your psychological experience, of course, and thinking of life from those animals' perspectives, whether it's a jackal who's picking the flesh off bones, and you're deciding that you're going to mummify the chief of the village, and you're trying to figure out how to embalm him. You're thinking like a jackal. You're thinking about cleaning this body and how you need to take out all of its innards, just like the birds do. That's the only thing you've ever seen in nature that does that. That actually picks out the guts and like leaves the guts to the side. That's stinky. It's gonna rot. So you're gonna do that for your. You're going to put salt inside the body and whatnot. The jackal or the birds or the vultures aren't going to do that, but these are things that you learn from preserving meats and whatnot. So you're going to integrate that also with your knowledge of how to clean, a carcass and stuff. These are practical things that I feel like our ancestors learned about from also utilizing psychedelics, because they show different things that we know don't really exist commonly in this reality, which is like, jackal-headed men. And, I'm talking specifically about like the House of Ra in Egypt, for example, and you've got something similar going on with the Dogon people in Africa. And you've also got something similar going on with Sangomas. There's a specific kind of theme that comes from certain psychedelic experiences that is then venerated as being sacred and protected, and then it becomes how that society or culture artistically represents themselves in life.
I think you are super at naturally synthesizing a lot of these ideas for people like me, and hopefully for many of our audience to get into, to understand, and to explore. So thank you for taking the time to put yourself out there at these conferences, to share your experience, to speak candidly with the humility that you speak with and with the love that you speak with. It was a big highlight of my day yesterday, and I hope that conversations like this can continue to lead people in the right direction.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
I appreciate
Acacia.
that. Thank you for
got it.
having me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.